to our children's schools.
Now is the time for a general election. A general election is the best way.
The election race is on, a short 7-week stretch from a surprise start to the finishing line, and the winner takes responsibility for giving Britain a historic turn ahead. Just what and who is Theresa May targeting? What is Jeremy Corbyn promising other than those holidays? Will Scotland prepare for separation? Will Britain get more than a touch of green? Let's look at all this and more.
Do you want to vote for a Tory party trying to negotiate a Brexit deal that will result in a low-tax, bargain-basement economy serving only the needs of the rich and the wealthy?
It's an opportunity. Our plan for a stronger Britain is precisely about helping ordinary working families. It's about an economy, a strong economy that creates those higher paid jobs. It's about opportunity for all.
We are, of course, at the start of a general election campaign. A campaign called by the Prime Minister last week for one purpose and one purpose only: to strengthen the grip of the Tory party and crush dissent and opposition.
It's a choice between that strong and stable leadership under the Conservatives or a weak and unstable coalition of chaos led by Jeremy Corbyn. And make no mistake about it, that is what is on offer. We've seen the other parties lining up to support Jeremy Corbyn, to prop him up, the Liberal Democrats. We've seen it from Nicola Sturgeon, Scottish nationalists.
May is seeing separatists now within the opposition, particularly the Scottish National Party, that wants to take Scotland into another referendum and possibly out of Britain itself to join the EU.
To change this country for the better, for the future, it's an opportunity to ensure this really is a country that works for everyone and not just the privileged few. And it's also about building a more united and secure nation, and that means, it does mean taking action against the extremists who try to divide us, but it also means standing up to the separatists who want to break apart our precious union.
The SNP seems unfazed by May's charges, and Nicola Sturgeon seems set on a course that will take Scotland further from England, if not out of Britain altogether.
The SNP has a mandate for a second referendum, not now, and certainly this election is not deciding whether or not Scotland becomes independent, but when the time is right, when the terms of Brexit are clear, then Scotland should have the right to choose its own future. We have a mandate for that. We sought that mandate in the Scottish election last year and won that election overwhelmingly.
The Conservatives and Labour speak of all sorts of differences, but they do seem united on keeping Scotland within Britain. Labour leader Jeremy Corbyn is dangling all sorts of incentives before Scotland.
We will create a Scottish National Bank under Scottish control and backed by the National Investment Bank with £20 billion of lending power to deliver the funds to local projects and small businesses, creating work and stimulating the economy. We will aggressively take on the tax avoiders and evaders, starting with making corporations publish the entirety of their tax returns.
Corbyn is promising rights for Scotland along the lines of United Workers across the country. In a reversal of New Labour set up by former Prime Minister Tony Blair, Corbyn is back to trade unionism.
I've been in the trade unions all my life, and I will die a trade unionist because that is what I believe in. That's why one of the very first things we will do when forming our Labour government will be to repeal the Tory Trade Union Act.
Corbyn is clear in his support for Brexit, though. It is the smaller parties taking the harder line against Brexit. The big question is whether they could expand their base on that basis. Both the Liberal Democrats and, in a smaller way, the Green Party are relying on the young, who by all indications were more strongly supportive of Britain remaining within the EU in the referendum of last year.
The decisions that we make now will affect my daughter, our children, all of us around us. And it is about those 16 to 18-year-olds, those 16 to 25s. 16 to 18-year-olds who were denied a vote in the referendum. They are the ones that are going to have to put up with this for the longest. They are the ones that are going to deal with the consequences of this. And it is so vital that we send a clear message. And we've got a government here that's listened to UKIP. And UKIP has said jump, and the government has said how high. We are the antidote to UKIP.
It is the United Kingdom Independence Party, UKIP, one of the smaller parties that precipitated the push into Brexit. And now the terms and the manner of Brexit have become the #1 talking point through the election campaign.
We've said that we're a free trade area, that's what we're aiming for, that we'll have a customs agreement. In other words, we want to get access to the rest of the world's markets, but at the same time try to maintain as much as possible, indeed possibly all, of the current markets we have.
In the end, anyone who thought that Britain should now be preparing harder in tough times through Brexit may have seen some relief in an unexpected message from Corbyn.
We will also introduce 4 new public holidays, giving people the time to lead better and more fulfilling lives, actually helping productivity at the same time, and we will ask for the support of the governments of Wales, Scotland and Northern Ireland so the same 4 holidays can be enjoyed across the whole of the United Kingdom.
With Sanjay, Suri in London, this is Vibha Verma for News 18.
Mammoth tasks lie ahead as Britain heads into a partition of sorts with the EU. But what of that earlier partition, the partition of India that created Pakistan? That partition touches our lives here today in more ways than we sometimes realize. What we remember, what we forget. Let's see after a very quick break. A word now with Lady Desai. Kishwar, thanks for joining us. Now, what led you to set up this museum?
I think there were a certain number of factors which were behind us setting up the Partition Museum. The most immediate factor was that it's 70 years since the partition of India. And there is not a single monument, not a single space, not a single memorial anywhere in the world. And it seemed a huge shame when other countries have recorded what has happened to their ancestors and their forefathers in some of the most traumatic moments of that country. In India, this had never happened.
Is that because in India we have a culture of forgetting rather than remembering and recalling?
I don't think so. I think there was a kind of an amnesia which took place immediately post-partition because the people who came at that time, or rather migrated whether from here to there or the other way, they were too busy settling down, finding new lives, starting new careers, looking after their loved ones, because they had lost not only just property but also many of the people in their family were gone forever. So I think it was a very traumatic event. So the forgetfulness was partly deliberate, partly because they had to just pick up the pieces and move on.
Talking forgetfulness, now you were mentioning the 9/11 Museum in America. The Jewish people have set up a Holocaust Museum. All this happened a while back. In India, let's face it, we don't preserve monuments, we don't preserve records. There's a rather dismissive attitude to the past. Chalo ji, ho gayi baat, ab chodo. Now, do you find that attitude changing?
I think that's changing in a big way. The response that we are getting to the Partition Museum, you saw that tonight with the group that we had today, it's that people are extremely interested, especially young people, because they feel terrible that their grandparents and parents have been forgotten, even though they had gone through so much. And these people now know that other countries have worked so hard to preserve their memories. So that is just one side of it. The other side is that we now have a huge interest in what happened, and people don't want just a single narrative. The good part about setting up a museum is that you can have multiple narratives. You can look at documents, you can look at original things lying there and come to your own conclusion.
How did you go about setting this up? Where will it be located? How did it happen?
Well, I think it was a bit of a miracle, really, because when we started 2 years ago, we never realized that things would happen so quickly and so fast, because the trust was set up in early 2015, after which we did a series of events which convinced us that there was a space for a museum now because of the amazing response we got. We were also collecting documents and oral histories. We went to the Punjab government and we were very happy to see that they were as keen on setting up as a partition museum as we were. And so very quickly we found that we were allotted a space to do it. Of course, there was a lot of hard work that went along with that. And now we find that the curtain raiser exhibition, which was set up last year, through which the museum was inaugurated in October, is getting up to 1,000 visitors in a day, which shows that there's a huge need for this.
And what will be in the museum?
Well, we have some fascinating material. We have a lot of interesting original material which is being given to us by the partition survivors or the families of the partition survivors. And this is amazing. Like we have a sewing machine, we have a stopwatch, we have clothes that were carried across the border, we have letters, refugee cards. So that is one side, which is the personal material, apart from the oral histories. But we also have official documents. And these are amazing official documents, files which lie both in India and in the UK, a large part of them in the UK, which have actually very rarely been opened before.
If I were to walk into that museum when it's up and fully running, what would I see?
You would see a lot of photographs, a lot of oral histories, poetry, art, literature, objects. You would also see a sense of what actually happened. You'll have newspaper, media coverage, documentaries, art installations, a lot of things which people are surprised sometimes when they come even to the curtain raiser exhibition and see the amount of material that we have already collected.
You were speaking narratives, but there were two sides to that partition, India and Pakistan, and the narrative in India is not quite the narrative in Pakistan. And you see those narratives clashing very close to your museum at the Wagah border, clashing visually and very dramatically. How do you resolve this?
You know, I don't actually buy that there were two sides to the narrative. As I said earlier, there are multiple narratives. There's also the British-Asian narrative, which we can see unfolding in the UK, which is one side of looking at the story. There are many multiple sides. The one narrative we have in the museum is a humanitarian narrative, that this was a great blow to the humanitarian aspect of India. People who'd lived for years and years in complete peace with each other was suddenly looking at each other with daggers drawn, and I think the sadness of it will also come out. So that's why we say it is a museum that is dedicated to the love that existed amongst people, and that's the important part of it. It is a museum which is dedicated to the loss that now exists and the nostalgia which we also feel today. So it is about shared history, shared cultures, shared pain. So I don't see it as just two sides of the story. There are many sides to this story.
Is there a risk then that the museum will be seen as a goody-goody place that pulls the cloak over difficult realities?
Not at all, because as I told you, we have all the official documents there. Some of them are very, very difficult to read. We have the oral histories there, which also talk about the loss people felt. I mean, why did communities turn against each other? So I think the stories are there, which are difficult, but then we also have a gallery of hope, which when people come to, they will realize that there are many positive things that also came out when people actually helped each other, and the humanitarianism that we thought was lost still exists.
Will Pakistanis be able to visit, or would you even consider opening a branch of the museum in Pakistan sometime?
You know, this is too early to say. Let the museum be fully functional, fully open. And yes, it is our hope that everywhere there should be a partition museum, not just in India, Pakistan, Bangladesh, but even here in the UK.
So many of the memories of the partition were horror memories. People have found that difficult to deal with, to live with. Now, how does that square with your hope of presenting harmony and togetherness or even shared loss?
Well, you know, I'm surprised you should say that, really, because I think if you come into even the curtain raiser exhibition that we have, it is the experience that you will go through that will make you think differently. It was not just a story about violence, you know, it was much, much more than that. It was a division of heritage, it was a division of culture, it was a division of everything. It was division of the army, it was division of the museums, it was... So I think the partition, if we look at it only through a narrow perspective of a communal divide, I think we're doing great harm to ourselves, to the history of our country. History's got divided. So I think we need to go into a space like that to actually understand what people underwent, the impact that it had on us, and then possibly come to your own conclusion.
There was a split after all. Independence and partition came in one action, and that action set India and Pakistan against one another as it turned out. But what about the British? Their role was dubious, and as records emerge, it appears more dubious by the day. How will you present that?
You know what we're doing? We are putting all the documents in the museum. The idea is to create one of the largest archives on partition anywhere in the world. We want to open up the discussion for scholars, for family members, for all visitors who come to the museum. Our job is to collect the archive and to tell the narrative of how many multiple narratives actually exist around the partition. So that is what we're trying to do, but I would like to repeat that ours is a humanitarian exercise. Becoming a refugee overnight was something which a lot of people underwent, and through no fault of theirs. They didn't even know that partition was coming because it was announced after independence. So they had finished celebrating independence and suddenly they were told, but you're in the wrong country. So I think that is the experience that this museum is trying to document, and that is what I hope the horror of that experience is what people will experience when they go there.
Finally, and not least, this looks like an expensive undertaking. How are you funding it?
Through donations. I mean, as strange as it may sound, but from day one, this museum is existing purely through donations from corporates, from individuals, and it's wonderful because people are coming forward and they're donating to us anything they can give, objects, oral histories, and of course money. And that is how we are surviving till today. The building was allotted to us by the government, but at that time itself they had said that you would have to raise the money, and we took on the challenge, and that's what we're doing now.
Kishwar, or Lady Desai I should say, with much admiration for your work, thanks very much for talking to us.